In ancient Egyptian culture, few symbols are as iconic and enduring as the figure of Anubis, the jackal-headed god of mummification and protector of the dead. Anubis, with his black canine head and watchful eyes, was the guardian of tombs and the guide of souls to the afterlife. But the significance of Anubis goes far deeper than his role as a divine figure. His association with jackals and, by extension, with dogs reflects a much broader cultural understanding of these animals as sacred symbols of protection, guardianship, and the boundary between life and death. This connection between Anubis and canines, particularly jackals and dogs, is rooted in their scavenging behavior around graves. Ancient Egyptians observed jackals in and around their cemeteries and tombs, noting their tendency to linger near the dead, which naturally led to a complex relationship between humans and these animals. Initially seen as a threat to the sanctity of burial sites, the jackal was later transformed into a sacred guardian, a symbol of protection for the dead. Anubis's jackal-headed form encapsulates this transformation, reflecting the deep reverence Egyptians held for these animals in matters related to death, the afterlife, and protection. To understand the association between Anubis and canines, it is essential to explore the behavior of jackals in ancient Egypt and the environment in which they lived. Jackals, a type of wild canine, are scavengers by nature. In the harsh desert landscape surrounding the Nile, food was often scarce, and jackals would take advantage of any available resource, including the remains of the dead. The arid desert with its dry climate made it difficult for early Egyptians to dig deep graves, leaving shallow burials vulnerable to animals like jackals, who could easily dig up the earth to access human remains. Jackals frequently prowled the edges of ancient cemeteries, feeding on the bodies of those who were not buried deeply enough. For early Egyptians, this behavior must have been both disturbing and terrifying, as the desecration of graves was seen as a violation of the sacred passage to the afterlife. However, rather than demonizing the jackals, the Egyptians transformed their presence into something spiritually meaningful. In a society deeply preoccupied with the concept of death and the afterlife, the Egyptians believed that the body needed to be preserved for the soul to successfully journey into the next world. The disturbance of graves by animals like jackals was therefore a significant concern, but instead of regarding jackals solely as a threat, the Egyptians interpreted their behavior through a sacred lens. Over time, the jackal came to represent both the danger that threatened burial sites and the spiritual protection needed to safeguard them. The Egyptians' shift from seeing jackals as threats to viewing them as protectors can be seen as part of a larger cultural tendency to spiritualize natural phenomena. In the case of the jackal, this transformation was driven by the Egyptians' belief that the animal's presence near burial sites indicated a deeper spiritual connection to death and the afterlife. Anubis, as the god of mummification and the protector of the dead, came to embody this sacred role. While jackals may have once disturbed graves, they were reimagined in the form of Anubis as protectors of the dead, guarding tombs from evil spirits and ensuring that the body remained undisturbed. In Egyptian belief, Anubis would ward off scavengers, both animal and spiritual, and ensure that the deceased could rest peacefully on their journey to the afterlife. This reimagining of the jackal as a protector can be seen in the artistic depictions of Anubis, which consistently show him as a strong, vigilant figure standing guard over tombs and coffins. His black fur was symbolic of regeneration and life after death, further reinforcing his connection to the cycle of death and rebirth that was so central to Egyptian spirituality. Anubis's protective role extended beyond the physical world. He was also seen as a guide for the soul, leading it safely through the underworld to the Hall of Mut, where it would be judged. Dogs in ancient Egypt, companions and guardians. While Anubis is most commonly associated with jackals, the ancient Egyptians also held dogs in high regard. Dogs were domesticated in Egypt as early as 3500 BC, and they played a variety of roles in Egyptian society, from hunters to herders to guards. Dogs, much like jackals, were seen as protective animals, and they often accompanied their owners in both life and death. In fact, dogs were sometimes buried with their owners, a practice that reflected the belief that they would continue to protect and accompany the deceased in the afterlife. Dogs were also commonly depicted in tomb paintings and funerary art, symbolizing the protection and loyalty they provided both in life and beyond. These depictions show that the Egyptians saw dogs as more than just animals. They were companions who had a role to play in the spiritual well-being of their owners. Just as Anubis protected the dead from spiritual dangers, dogs in the physical world protected their human companions from physical threats. Their loyalty, protective instincts, and close bond with humans made them ideal symbols of guardianship. In some cases, dogs were even deified or given special status, with several notable examples of dog deities in Egyptian religion. For instance, Wepwawet, another canine-headed deity, was closely associated with Anubis and was often depicted as a warrior figure who opened the way for the dead to pass into the afterlife. Like Anubis, Wepwawet was linked to jackals and dogs, further illustrating the important role these animals played in Egyptian conceptions of death and protection. Anubis and the protection of the soul. Anubis's role as the protector of the dead was not limited to the physical safeguarding of tombs and burial sites. His duties extended into the spiritual realm, where he was responsible for guiding souls through the dangerous and uncertain journey of the afterlife. In Egyptian belief, the afterlife was filled with perils, and the soul needed to be protected from malevolent forces as it made its way to the judgment hall of Osiris. Anubis's most famous task was the weighing of the heart ceremony, where the hearts of the deceased were weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and justice. If the heart was lighter than the feather, the soul could enter the field of reeds, the Egyptian paradise. If it was heavier, it would be devoured by the monster Amit. In this role, Anubis was both a protector and a judge, ensuring that only the worthy could pass into the afterlife. The image of Anubis presiding over the weighing of the heart underscores his role as a guardian of the soul. His presence at this crucial moment symbolizes the protection he offered to the deceased, ensuring that they received a fair and just judgment. Anubis was not only a protector of the physical body, but also of the spiritual well-being of the deceased, guiding them through both the physical dangers of the tomb and the spiritual trials of the afterlife. Anubis in Egyptian funerary practices. The importance of Anubis in Egyptian funerary practices cannot be overstated. As the god of mummification, Anubis was intimately involved in the preparation of the body for burial, a process that was crucial to the deceased's successful journey into the afterlife. Priests who performed the mummification rituals would often wear masks of Anubis, symbolically taking on the role of the god as they prepared the body for burial. The Egyptians believed that the preservation of the body was essential for the soul's survival in the afterlife. By invoking the power of Anubis during the mummification process, they sought his protection and guidance to ensure that the body would remain intact and the soul would be able to find its way to the afterlife. Tombs and burial chambers were often adorned with images of Anubis, further emphasizing his protective role. His image was used to ward off evil spirits and to ensure that the tomb remained undisturbed. Egyptians believed that Anubis would guard the tombs just as fiercely as the dogs and jackals that had inspired his image in the first place. The legacy of Anubis and canine symbolism in ancient Egypt. The association between Anubis and canines, particularly jackals and dogs, reflects a profound cultural understanding of the relationship between humans and animals in ancient Egypt. Jackals, once seen as threats to burial sites, were transformed into sacred symbols of protection, embodying the spiritual guardianship that was so central to Egyptian beliefs about death and the afterlife. Anubis, with his jackal-headed form, became the ultimate protector of the dead, ensuring that both their physical remains and their souls were safeguarded. His role as a guide, protector, and judge in the afterlife made him one of the most important deities in the Egyptian pantheon, and his association with canines further cemented the sacred status of dogs and jackals in Egyptian culture. The reverence for these animals as protectors in both life and death is a testament to the deep connection between humans and canines in ancient Egypt. From the jackals that prowled the edges of cemeteries to the dogs that guarded homes and tombs, these animals played a vital role in the spiritual and material lives of the Egyptians. Anubis, as the divine representation of this bond, continues to be a powerful symbol of protection, loyalty, and the eternal journey between life and death.